Dear students, today the topic for discussion is rural scenario, and in this context we will be discussing a host of issues because as you know, the government has initiated a lot of programs for the rural sector. We need to understand how they have impacted the rural life, and especially in context of the health sector, as far as education of the rural people is concerned. Then we have the other issues, that is the social context, then population, land holdings, sanitation and water management, and of course also waste disposal. So these are some of the issues which are very pertinent for anybody, but more so in the context of the rural life. We need to understand how far these programs have been successful. So we start off by first understanding that what is the rural setup, what exactly is the rural scenario. And in this I would very briefly like to tell you that the rural setup is basically that the majority of the rural population are small landholders, artisans and laborers with very limited resources, and they spend mostly on food and necessities such as clothing and shelter. The second aspect which is important to understand is that the alarming rate of growth in population nullifies or definitely it subdues all the development efforts of the government. So we need to understand how this actually happens. Now, what is the ground reality after more than 6 decades of independence, after so many efforts which have been undertaken in the rural sector? What is the ground reality that is actually faced by the rural people? What we find is that the life expectancy, although has risen from 33% at independence to 62 years in 1998, the infant mortality has also declined from 146 per 1,000 live births in 1961 to 72 per 1,000 in 1999. The under 5 mortality rate for children has declined from 236 per 1,000 live births in 1960 to 109 per 1,000 in 1993. Now, although if you just look at the figures, they do look significant, yet it must be stressed that these survival rates are comparable even today to sub-Saharan Africa, which is one of the most poorer countries in the world. So should this be the situation in India, even after all the development efforts that have been undertaken by the government? And what we find is that even within the country, there are a lot of regional, interstate and socio-economic class and gender disparities which are very, very high. So these are some of the ground realities that are faced. Now first let us find out what is the situation regarding health. We find that still unsafe and unhygienic birth practices are practiced, unclean water, poor nutrition. Secondly, they have subhuman habitats, degraded and unsanitary environment. Two All India surveys, that is the National Survey, 46th round, and the NCAR New Delhi, they have found that medical treatment is the most important cause of rural indebtedness, next only to dowry. Because of the inadequate health facilities, the rural poor are forced to seek private help in medical care, and this results in indebtedness because the cost of acquiring medical help on a private basis is rather high. So this leads to rural indebtedness, and the challenges to the public health system are actually very immense. Now let's try to understand what is primary health care. Primary health care is a national health system in which the state plays a leading role in determining the health care services to the population. It calls for an integration of preventive, promotive, curative and rehabilitative health services that are accessible and available to the people and by the principles of universality and equality. This means that these healthcare services should be available to everyone, irrespective of the place that they stay in, which caste they belong to, and it should basically be on an equal basis, because every citizen in India is equal. The government program for rural healthcare is known as National Health Rural Mission. Let's try to find out what exactly is this program. The Government of India launched the National Rural Health Mission for Effective Healthcare Delivery System. It was launched in 2005 for a period of 7 years, and it had a special focus on 18 states. The mission adopts a synergistic approach by relating health to determinants of good health. What are the determinants of good health? That is nutrition, sanitation, hygiene, and safe drinking water. It also aims at mainstreaming the Indian systems of medicine to facilitate healthcare. The NHRM program covers all the villages through village-based accredited social health activists, which is known as ASHA. They are known as ASHA, who act as a link between the health centers and the villages. So these ASHAs, they go from, like, let us say a program like polio, which is to be given to small children. So they go from house to house, finding out where small children are located. Then either they advise them to go to the health centers to get the polio drops, or they themselves come to the house and administer the drops. So this acts as a link between the villagers and the health centers, either as an awareness program and also for rendering small services which can be done at the doorstep of the villagers. Now, as far as healthcare is concerned, although so much money has been spent over the years on providing rural healthcare, yet we find some very glaring disparities. I will just like to enumerate a few of them. That is, the chief interest of the primary healthcare is focused on family planning, child survival, and safe motherhood, which basically become more a kind of a statistical targets rather than health services. And also, we find that 20% of the medical research grants are allocated for the studies on cancer, which is responsible for only 1% of the deaths in the rural areas, while only 1% of the research is provided for respiratory diseases, which actually account for 20% of the deaths. So actually it should be different. The research should be more focused on respiratory diseases rather than on cancer. Yet we find it is the absolute opposite. Moreover, we also find that medical care and control of communicable diseases are crucial areas of concern, both in terms of what people need as well as what existing socio-economic conditions demand. Yet at the same time, what we find is that the overall public expenditure on these subsectors has been declining both in the 1980s as well as in the 1990s. Actually, this should have been increasing, and it has been decreasing. So we now try to focus on the health and the nutrition status, and what we find is that undernutrition is responsible for high infant and maternity mortality rates, that is known as MMR, and low birth weight in children. The NFHS 2 data shows that 40.6% of the Indian rural women are underweight and 54% are anemic. And this is one of the major reasons for high MMR as well as infant mortality rate. Secondly, we also find that the rural MMR is much higher than the urban MMR. That is, the rural MMR is 619 compared to 267 in the urban sector. And the reasons are, again, undernutrition, lack of healthcare facilities, lack of awareness about healthy nutritional practices, and immunization in the rural sector. So we find that not only MMR, that is the maternity mortality rate, is high, but also IMR is high in the rural sector. And the infant mortality rate for rural areas is 73.3 compared to 47 for urban areas. So you can see the disparity between the urban and the rural sector as far as IMR and MMR is concerned. Although the government is working in both the sectors, both the areas, that is the rural as well as the urban sector, but yet we find that the situation is much more dangerous in the rural sector. Then we come to the aspect of illiteracy. India has one of the highest illiteracy levels in the world, and the majority of them are in the rural areas. The government programs on education, as you know, the government had started programs on DPEP and Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan. They have had a positive impact in reducing illiteracy, but yet there is still a very long way to go. Now, what is the reasons for high illiteracy? First is that the attitude of the children and teachers is not positive regarding education. The enrollment in the primary and the middle level is low. Although over the number of years since the programs have started for education, they have gradually been going up. Yet at the same time, it is much less than what is required. The level of education in rural areas is poor, which results in high dropouts. What we find, and many other studies that have been conducted, they show that the learning levels are very poor. So which indicate that the children are going to school, yet at the same time, they are not learning anything. So the parents also feel it is not worthwhile to send the children, and the children also feel that it is not worthwhile to go to school. So there may be other reasons for which they do go, that is maybe the midday meal scheme, for which they would go to school, but not because they are really learning anything, and which is the entire purpose of the whole exercise. Then there are other reasons for children dropping out of school, which are lack of interest. They have to work in the fields, they have household duties, and also there is a gender bias. In the rural areas, people are very reluctant to send their daughters to study. So that may be one of the reasons that after the initial primary enrollment, they study for a few years, and after that, they drop out of school. Then another reason is that illiterate parents have very little faith in the education system and are reluctant to educate their children, because they say we are not educated, so why should we educate our own children also? So they don't understand the importance of education. Then another factor is that teachers are also very reluctant to teach in the rural areas. The reason is that it is not very lucrative for them as far as their own career growth is concerned to go to the rural areas. So they are not very interested in going to the rural areas to teach. Another hampering factor is inadequate books and learning material. Then the infrastructure at the schools where the children are taught is also very dismal. We find, and we have read about these reports, that many of the schools they function even without a roof. So during the monsoon season, they have no other option but to tell the children to go home, because the infrastructure is so low. So this is not a situation throughout rural India, but what I am saying is that these kind of problems also persist, which hamper rural education, and that ultimately leads to illiteracy. Then we also find that although computers have been purchased, yet they are hardly used. Reason is because there is, for one thing, no teachers to teach them, and secondly, there is no electricity. So the computers have been bought, money has been spent, yet at the same time, this facility has not actually been used. Now we find, we have also always heard that Kerala is a state which is leading in education, and we find that there are very low level of literacy in Kerala. It can actually be a model for the other states to copy, but this has not happened over the years, because Kerala, why it has done well is it has got a very well developed education system program, and it has benefited the rural children also. The private donations also go for this sector, and the government support is also there, so that has made the success of the education system in Kerala. And this can certainly be copied, emulated by other states, and let's see when it finally happens. There are some very good projects which are being done in the education sector for the rural children by a number of NGOs. I am telling you about one of them, which is one of the most famous ones. It's known as the Ish Vidya project in Tamil Nadu. It is a initiative of the Isha Education Foundation, and it is committed to raise the level of education and literacy in rural India and help disadvantaged children realize their full potential. The Isha Vidya schools empower rural children to meet future challenges with computer-based education and innovative methods for overall development and blossoming of each child. So basically what this education initiative does is to provide education to the rural children, which is also very interesting for them. It is known as joyful learning. So it focuses on providing them, not only bringing up their level of education, but at the same time giving them education which would be at par with what they can get in the urban areas. So it is very child friendly. It is also a lot of learning material is used, and it helps the rural children to increase their capability, and also to leads to development of the child. Now what happens is that even the private individuals, they have come forward to donate for this good cause. They can do so by donating land, they can provide infrastructure, they can sponsor students, they can contribute towards facilities like computer labs, books, sports facilities, transport facilities, school uniforms, and also they can contribute by providing supplemental food to the children. Now we come to the water supply and sanitary situation. What we find is that the water supply and sanitation, although this is a state responsibility under the Indian Constitution, and the states in turn can give this responsibility to the Panchayati Raj institutions. And the Ministry of Rural Development is responsible for rural water supply through its Department of Drinking Water Supply. Now, water supply and sanitation in India continues to be rather inadequate despite long-standing efforts by the various levels of government and communities at improving coverage. From 1947 to 2002, average annual per capita availability has declined. I repeat, it has declined by almost 70%. Now what we find is the population is increasing, but the per capita availability of water is declining, and the sanitation coverage is only 44% at present in the rural areas. At the time of the last census in 2001, it was only 22%. After the several initiatives of the government, it has increased from 22 to 44. Yet, at the same time, it is still very inadequate and much less than what is required. What is the sanitation scenario? We find that access to on-site sanitation has increased in both urban as well as rural areas. In the 10th plan, the role of sanitation and hygiene was considered to be extremely important for controlling the high IMR and MMR. That is because hygiene is directly related to the infant mortality rates and the maternal mortality rates. And the lack of toilet facilities, it poses a very major risk. And it was estimated by the World Health Organization that 7 lakh people die of diarrhea every year in India. So the situation is alarming, absolutely alarming. And yet we find that still the sanitation facilities are woefully inadequate, especially in the rural areas. As I told you that sanitation is only available in about 22% of the households, which has now gone up to 44. but there are disparities even across states. The disparity is as low as, in Jharkhand it is very low. Then it is as high as 81% in Kerala, 60% in Assam, 9% in Madhya Pradesh, and 8% in Orissa. So it is actually the landless and the marginalized who continue to be left without toilets. The reasons for low sanitation, let's try to understand them, and we find that the major factors that have impeded effective implementation of a rural sanitation program include very low priority accorded to sanitation as a social and community issue. Then lack of infrastructure and systems to reach all households, especially the rural ones, and of course most important, the scarcity of water. So we find that for one thing, awareness is not there, second is facility is not there, and the third is that the infrastructure is not in place, there is a scarcity of water, and so that leads to low sanitation, which results in poor hygiene, and then it causes a lot of other impacts in so many different ways by impacting upon the health and the nutrition status also. If you see this bar chart, you will find that the percentage of households with toilet facilities, it's the lowest in Jharkhand and the highest in Kerala, with the other states falling in between. So if Kerala can do it, then why not Jharkhand? That is the first question that comes to your mind. Where is the problem? Why it has not been done? That is something for the government and the functionaries to think about and find out that what they can do to increase coverage in the low sanitation areas. Now the government has introduced several programs for sanitation over the years. We'll just talk about them briefly and then try to find out how it has impacted upon actually bringing about a change. And what we find is that in 1986, that is several years after the country had gained independence, the first structural program for rural sanitation was developed. It was known as the Central Rural Sanitation Program, and it had basically minimal community participation. What it involved was that it would just give the sanitation program a thrust, but not basically based on demand, but basically based on supply. So in 1999, the scheme was restructured. It was made more demand driven and people centered, and was given the name of Total Sanitation Campaign or Community Led Sanitation, Total Sanitation Campaign. It was also known as CLTS. Now CLTS was first pioneered in Bangladesh in 1999 and has been widely adopted, particularly within South and Southeast Asia. So that is basically, it means that something which has proved to be effective in other parts of the world, it can definitely be adopted by India also to get good results. And CLTS has great potential for meeting the Millennium Development Goals, both directly in water and sanitation, and indirectly through combating major diseases and improving maternal health. Now, what exactly are the objectives of the Total Sanitation Campaign? And we find that it brings about an improvement in the general quality of life in the rural areas. It accelerates sanitation coverage in rural areas. It eliminates open defecation to minimize risk of contamination of drinking water sources and food. It generates demand through awareness and health education. It covers all schools and Anganwadis in rural areas with sanitation facilities and promotes hygiene education among students and teachers. It encourages cost-effective and appropriate technologies in sanitation and endeavors to reduce water and sanitation-related diseases. So these are the different objectives of Total Sanitation Campaign. Now let's try to find out what has been the impact of the Total Sanitation Campaign. And what we find is that it has brought about a positive change. The TSC has helped to bring about some hygiene and sanitation in the rural areas. Of the 138 million rural households in India, according to the 2001 census, 3.5 million have constructed household toilets with support from TSC. Over 1,700 women complexes have been built, 41,000 school toilets have been built, and support facilities such as the rural sanitary marts have also been built at a total cost of about 2.92 billion. The TSC, which was covering about 520 of India's 607 districts, aims to cover all primary and upper primary schools with safe water, child-friendly toilets, and hygiene education for children. TSC also covers Anganwadi centers with safe water and baby-friendly toilets. The TSC also aims to make sanitation and hygiene a people's agenda. TSC projects are sanctioned in all districts of the country in 2006-07 and plans to achieve full sanitation by 2012. We still have to find out whether that happens, but at least the process has been started and there has definitely been some measure of success also. After the TSC, the subsequent efforts of the Indian government, one of them was Swajal Dhara. This was initiated in 2002 and the government of India rolled out a national level program called Swajal Dhara to change the way in which water and sanitation services are supported in the rural areas. Now, what exactly is Swajal Dhara? It is the phasing out of supply-driven programs. As I told you earlier, the program that was initially initiated was supply-driven. It was not based on demand. Then subsequently, TSC was initiated, which was based on demand. So Swajal Dhara also was focused on demand-driven programs, not on supply-driven. That is not just construct the toilets and give it to the rural people. The toilets are constructed in relation to the demand that is required, that has been put in by the rural people. Then it decentralizes service delivery programs to rural local governments and user groups. That is, the local government would be looking after the servicing of that delivery, not the state government. Then adopting an integrated approach to water supply and sanitation and improving hygiene behavior. That is, it integrated that how sanitation impacts hygiene, how does it impact upon the health. It integrated all of them to bring about a better response. And then generating sanitation demand through awareness campaigns. As you know, this program was demand driven, so they have to also create awareness so that the demand also comes from the rural people for better sanitation facilities. Now, a lot of NGOs have also been active in the rural areas. I am just telling you about a couple of them, how they have brought about a change in water and sanitation. One of them is the Bonita Trust. This is based in Gibraltar. They have an association with Gram Vikas, which is an NGO based in India, and they launched a water and sanitation project in 20 rural habitations in the state of Orissa. Another NGO is Mantra, which provides a toilet and bathing room with piped water supply to each of the target 1,500 families in 20 villages over a 2-year period. The water and sanitation infrastructure is complemented with health and hygiene education, leadership development, and fund management. Another NGO, of course, it's an international organization, UNICEF, is also supporting school sanitation projects in Andhra Pradesh. So together, I mean, it's the government, it's the NGOs, the international multilateral organizations, together they are trying to give the thrust on water supply and sanitation so that these facilities improve in the rural areas. Another of the projects of the government is known as Integrated Rural Sanitation and Water Supply Project. This scheme aims to improve the health and sanitary condition in the project area villages through integrated approach to provide safe drinking water and sanitation through participatory and demand-driven approach. This program has been implemented with the support of DANIDA, and the water supply works, individual household and institutional toilets are taken up as projects for providing these facilities in the rural area. World Bank has also been active in providing these facilities, and it has done so in the states of Karnataka, Uttarakhand and Punjab. Now we come to the aspect of waste management. Let us first try to understand what exactly is waste management. Waste management is the collection, transport, processing, recycling and disposal and monitoring of waste material. The term usually relates to materials produced by human activity and is generally undertaken to reduce their effect on health and the environment. Waste management is also undertaken to recover resources from it, because a lot of material which has been thrown away as a waste can be recycled to, for one thing, eliminate the pressure on the landfills, and secondly, should I do that again? No. Waste management involves solid, liquid, gaseous or radioactive substances with different methods and fields of expertise for disposing of each of them. Waste management practices differ for both urban and rural areas and for residential and industrial producers. Now let us try to find out what is the waste disposal practices in the rural areas. We find that solid and liquid waste disposal is a major problem in India, and this is more so in rural areas. It poses a major health and environmental hazard. There is little support of the government for waste disposal in the rural areas. It was estimated that in 2003 that only 30% of India's wastewater was being treated, and the remainder was just flowing into the rivers or into the groundwater. So when it goes to the groundwater, it contaminates the drinking water sources also. So which in effect impacts the health of the people who drink the water. Now limited waste management has been practiced in rural areas, but there have been some projects which have been very successful, that is the biogas and the composting. These have been projects which have been very successful in the rural areas, and now gradually they are also being adopted in the urban areas. Another practice that was found in rural areas was that the waste generated through immunization, that is the needles, they were mixed with the other biomedical waste and simply dumped into the backyard of the health facilities. So what will it impact it will have is that for one thing it generates, it contaminates the soil also, it's very unhygienic, so that also impacts upon the health of the rural people. So these are some of the factors which have to be, of course, be looked into by the functionaries to see that the waste disposal is proper. Then we come to another related issue of hygiene, and we find that hygiene awareness and its impact is low in the rural areas. Young children bear a huge part of the burden of disease resulting from the lack of hygiene and sanitation. Then consumption of contaminated drinking water, improper disposal of human excreta, lack of personal and food hygiene, and improper disposal of solid and liquid waste have been the major causes of many diseases in India. High infant mortality rate and high levels of malnutrition are also attributed to poor sanitation. There have been some companies which have been active in trying to generate hygiene awareness. One of the companies has been Reckitt Benckiser, which is the company which manufactures Dettol. And they have launched a Dettol Surakshat Parivar campaign, in which the global health experts of Global Hygiene Council, they visit various villages across the country and deliver lectures on health and hygiene. They also hold workshops for nurses and midwives in hospitals. Then there is another group of international volunteers along with local specialists who visit schools and rural settlements of the Goa region to create awareness regarding health and hygiene and the need of education among the adults and the children. So you find that these are just very limited level of initiatives taken by the private sector and by voluntary organizations. But the the demand and the need basically of generating hygiene awareness is huge in the rural areas. And so you can see the amount of work that is required to actually be able to do so. So these are some of the initiatives that I have told you about. Another aspect that we will focus upon in the rural areas are the cultural and the social values that are practiced by people in the rural areas. And we find that India's real culture is still preserved in the rural life. New advancement of technology has not made much of an influence in the rural areas. People still prefer to wear dresses of old fashion and celebrate festivals in the old style. Folk dances and folk songs are still very popular among villagers. Culture is still untouched and unaffected by Western influence. They are proud of the traditions and observe them religiously. The community is very close-knit and the panchayat is supreme, whose decisions are honored by everyone in the village. When we come to the aspect of population, I think we also need to talk about the population policy. The National Population Policy was introduced in 2005 and it gave emphasis to a holistic approach. What the National Population Policy emphasized upon was the improvement in quality of life for all, no gender bias in education, employment, child survival rates, sound social security, promotion of culturally and socially acceptable family welfare methods. Now let us focus on what is the impact of the population on the land holdings. And what we find is that increase in population leads to fragmented land holdings. I'll explain how this happens. Let us say a farmer has got 3 sons. He will will it to his 3 sons. The same land will be divided into 3 separate families. So the big land has now been fragmented into 3 families. Please stop it for a little while. Now let us try to find out how the increase in population leads to fragmented land holdings. As you know that I am giving you one example. Let us say a farmer has got 3 sons. He wills it to his 3 children. So the big land that he had, let us say it was about 12 hectares. It has been now subdivided into 3. So each of the sons get 4 hectares. In turn, when they will it to the children, again the land will get fragmented. So over a period of time, the land holdings have been getting smaller and smaller, and that is actually very unproductive. So something which is grown over a big area is much more profitable for the farmer than something grown over a very small area, and small land holdings are very unprofitable. So that is also one of the reasons why the income for the rural farmer has been gradually going down, because the land holdings are getting smaller and smaller. The decline in the per capita land holding due to overpopulation has been seen for decades in the villages, and this trend is also now getting spilled over to the urban areas. What we find is that in the urban areas, the pressure on land is so high that the cost of acquiring any property is gradually going higher and higher, because there is so much pressure on land. So the increase in population, it has a direct correlation with the fragmentation of the land holdings that a person possesses as of now. Over a period of time, it just becomes smaller and smaller. At the time of independence, it's very interesting to note that the average size of land holding was about 4.7 hectares, which as of now has gone down to only 2.4 hectares. That is, it has halved over a period of 6 decades or more. It has actually halved from 4.7 to 2.4. And 72% of the farmers, their land holding is less than 1 hectare. It is either 1 hectare or less than 1 hectare. So over a period of time, the land holdings are becoming smaller and smaller. And as you know, this is absolutely true that the quantum of land owned by a rural household is an important indicator of the economic status of the household, because a bigger land holding would generate more income, a smaller land holding would generate smaller income. And nearly 40% of the rural households in India do not possess any land, while 30% own between 0.1 to 2 acres of land. So the land holdings are getting smaller and smaller. Some of them have no land at all. Some have got very meager quantity of land which are not very profitable. So over a period of time, that is also impacting upon their economic status. Let us try to find out how. The correlation between land holdings, income and occupation, it shows that the level of land possessed have a direct correlation with the earning levels. Households that do not own any cultivated land form the largest group, that is 37% of the rural population, and their share in rural income is only 30%. So they constitute 37% of the population, yet their share in rural income is only 30%. In contrast, what you find is that large farmers who account for only 4.7% of the rural population, they contribute about 9% to the rural income. So on one hand, you have poor farmers with small land holdings who are together, they are just contributing about 30% to the rural income, while the big landowners, they are contributing, they are very small in number, and yet they are contributing a much larger size in proportion to their size to the rural income. So what we find is that the richer are getting richer and the poorer are getting poorer in the rural areas. Land holdings held by households are related to occupation also. So we find that the bulk of landless households are laborers. They haven't got any other option, so they become laborers. And households with large land holdings have agriculture as the main source of income, in comparison with just 2.5% agricultural households in landless categories. So landless categories, how they can practice agriculture is that they normally take land on rent from someone else, they till the land and they generate some income. So the big landowners, they are the ones who indulge in farming activity on a big scale, and of course they generate big profits also. Now there is this table of, we have listed out how the household income profile by the size of the land holdings, in which we find that the percentage of households which are landless are 40.5, marginal are 29.7, small are 14.1, medium is 11.9, and large are 3.7% of the total rural population. In contrast, the per capita income is only 8,409 for the landless, while in contrast for the large it is 19,666. So you can see the difference between that. They are small in number, yet their income is large, while the landless and the marginal are much more in number, yet their income is less than half of the rich farmers. So in conclusion, what we can say is that the government has increased spending on several programs for rural people, but it still falls short of what is required to be done. And the increase in population nullifies or subdues the impact of any developmental program. What is required in the rural areas is pura. This concept of providing urban amenities in rural areas was first mooted by our president, our past president, Dr. Abdul Kalam, who said that rural people should also be provided with the same amenities that are given to the urban people. So this is known as providing urban amenities in rural areas, and it would be best if people in the rural areas are given the same amenities that are available to their urban counterparts, so that they are happy in their own setup and do not migrate to cities in search of a better life. Thank you very much.